The morning that broke a town. June 10, 1912. A quiet Monday morning in Villisca, Iowa. A small town of 2,500 people. A place where everyone knew everyone. A place where doors were left unlocked at night. Mary Peckham, a neighbor, walked across the street to check on the Moore family next door. It was unusual that their curtains were still drawn at this hour. Unusual that no one had come out to do the morning chores. She knocked on the door. No answer. She tried the handle. Locked. She went around the back. Locked. She found Josiah Moore's brother, Ross, and asked him to open the house. He unlocked the door. And they walked inside. What they found that morning was so horrifying, so beyond anything this quiet Iowa town had ever seen, that it would make headlines across the entire United States. 8 people. A father, a mother, 4 children, and 2 young girls who had come for a sleepover. All dead. All murdered in their beds with an axe. And nobody, not a single neighbor, not a single person in that small, quiet town, had heard a thing. The Villisca Axe Murders are considered one of the most prolific and heinous crimes to take place on U.S. soil. And more than 110 years later, the killer has never been identified. Before the horror. To understand what happened that night, you first need to understand who the Moore family was. In 1912, Villisca was a small but thriving town in southwestern Iowa with a population of approximately 2,500 people. Its economy was largely supported by agriculture and trade. Life in Villisca revolved around routine, predictability, and close social networks. Churches played a central role in community life, as did schools and local businesses. Crime was relatively rare, and serious violent crime was even rarer. Most residents knew one another, and trust among neighbors was considered a defining feature of the town. The Moores were exactly the kind of family this town admired. Josiah Moore, the patriarch of the family, was 43 years old. His wife, Sarah, was 39. The couple had 4 children together: Herman, 11 years old; Mary, 10; Arthur, 7; and Paul, just 5 years old. Everybody loved them, said Johnny Hauser, a tour guide at the Villisca Axe Murder House. Think of that family from your small hometown that everyone loves, everyone respects, nobody has a problem with. On the evening of June 9, 1912, the Moore family attended a Children's Day program at the local Presbyterian church. It was a normal evening. A happy evening. After the program, 10-year-old Mary invited 2 of her friends, Lena Stillinger, 12, and her little sister Ina, just 8 years old, to come home with the family for a sleepover. The Moores arrived home a little before 10 p.m. No one knows exactly what happened after that. Because by morning, all 8 of them were dead. What they found inside. When Peace Officer Hank Horton searched the residence, he discovered that all 8 victims had been bludgeoned. Doctors concluded that the murders had taken place between midnight and 5 a.m. The killer began in the master bedroom, where Josiah and Sarah Moore were sleeping. Josiah received more blows from the axe than any other victim. The killer then went into the children's rooms and bludgeoned Herman, Mary, Arthur, and Paul in the same manner. The 2 Stillinger girls, who were sleeping in the downstairs guest room, were the last victims. All the blows were struck above the neck, said historian Edgar Repperly. That was true of all the victims. They had a face cloth over their face, a piece of clothing that the killer picked up. And they had the bed clothing pulled over that. But it was the details beyond the bodies that disturbed investigators most. Beyond the bodies, the crime scene was full of strange details. The axe was left downstairs. Raw bacon was laying on the floor. Mirrors were covered with sheets. Food was on the table. Cigarette butts were found in the attic. Bloody water was discovered. Just tons of crime scene evidence, said Hauser, all destroyed by half the town wandering around looking at it. Think about that. The killer had covered all the mirrors with sheets, left raw bacon on the floor, and had apparently sat in the attic, smoking cigarettes, possibly watching the family sleep before the attack. At the Moore house, the murderer also hung aprons and skirts to cover the windows, to prevent passers-by from looking in. This was not a random act of rage. This was planned. This killer had been in that house before the murders began. Waiting. Who did this? At least 6 local suspects emerged in the investigation. Here are the 4 most credible ones. Suspect number 1. Reverend George Kelly. The Reverend George Jacqueline Kelly was a traveling preacher originally born in England. He attended the Children's Day program on June 9, 1912, the same program the Moore family attended that evening. His presence in Villisca on the night of the murders, and his subsequent departure in the early morning hours of June 10, made him a prime suspect. Kelly was described as peculiar, reportedly having suffered a mental breakdown as an adolescent. As an adult, he was accused of peeping and several times asking young women and girls to pose nude for him. Kelly's fascination with the murders drew suspicion, and he described the crimes in great detail when contacted by a private investigator, claiming to have heard sounds and possibly witnessed the murders. In 1917, 5 years after the murders, Kelly was arrested and charged. He confessed. But the confession was inconsistent. The first trial ended in a hung jury. The second, in an acquittal. Kelly walked free. He died in 1930, never convicted. Suspect number 2. Senator Frank F. Jones. Many Villisca residents believed Iowa State Senator Frank F. Jones was the culprit. Josiah Moore had been a clerk for Jones in his hardware and implement business. About 5 years before the murder, Josiah left and became a direct competitor to Jones. Jones was powerful. Jones was wealthy. And according to investigators, Jones had harbored a deep hatred of Josiah Moore. Detective James Wilkerson believed that Jones, arguably the wealthiest and most influential resident of Villisca, pressured for the prime suspect William Mansfield to be released, and pushed for Reverend Kelly to be arrested instead. Jones was never charged. He died in 1921, his reputation destroyed by the accusations, but his freedom never taken. Suspect number 3. William Mansfield. William Mansfield was a hired man, a drifter with connections to Frank Jones. Investigators believe Jones may have hired Mansfield to commit the murders. Payroll records showed that Mansfield had been working several hundred miles away in Illinois at the time of the murders, and he was released for lack of evidence. But a restaurant owner from Shenandoah, Iowa identified Mansfield as the man he saw boarding a train from Villisca the morning after the murders, saying this man had walked from Villisca. If true, Mansfield's alibi was false. The case against him was never proven. Suspect number 4. Paul Muller, Billy the Axeman. In their 2017 book The Man from the Train, Bill James and his daughter Rachel McCarthy James concluded that the murderer was Paul Muller, a German-speaking immigrant who was the subject of an unsuccessful manhunt as the sole suspect in an 1897 murder of a family in Massachusetts. Their investigation suggested a much larger series of murders, a serial killer who may have been responsible for at least 24 axe murders across the Midwest between 1911 and 1912. If Muller was the killer, then the Villisca murders were not an isolated event. They were part of a killing spree that crossed multiple states. And the people of Villisca had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. A century of questions. No one else has ever been tried for the murders, and the crime remains one of the most horrific, unsolved mass murders in American history. Why? Reason 1. The crime scene was destroyed. Half the town wandered into the Moore house before investigators arrived. Evidence was contaminated, moved, or destroyed within hours of the bodies being discovered. In 1912, there was no professional crime scene protocol, no DNA analysis, and no forensic standards. Reason 2. Political interference. Multiple investigators believe that Senator Frank Jones used his political influence to redirect the investigation away from himself and toward Reverend Kelly. Whether this is true or not, the inconsistency of the investigation has never been satisfactorily explained. Reason 3. Too many suspects. 6 credible suspects. Multiple theories. No physical evidence definitively linking any of them to the crime. Without a clear answer, the case collapsed into competing theories that have never been resolved. Reason 4. Time. The murders remain an unresolved chapter in American history, defined not by certainty, but by unanswered questions and investigative limitations. Every suspect, every witness, every person who was alive that night in Villisca, is now gone. What remains? Today, the house is a tourist destination in the small rural Iowa town of Villisca. A couple purchased the home in 1995 and undid all the modern renovations, restoring it to its 1912 condition. The couple now offers tours and overnight stays in the house. The axe marks are still visible. The rooms are still furnished as they were that night. And according to countless visitors, the house does not feel empty. Over time, the meaning of the house has evolved. What began as a private residence and then a crime scene gradually became a subject of national fascination. As the case remained unsolved, public interest shifted from immediate justice to long-term speculation. The Villisca Axe Murder House has even been featured on the popular web series BuzzFeed Unsolved. But for all the ghost hunters and overnight visitors, the most chilling thing about this house is not the reported paranormal activity. It is the fact that whoever walked through that front door on the night of June 9, 1912, and killed 8 people, including 5 children, walked back out again. And was never caught. What we're left with: 8 victims. 5 of them children. A small Iowa town that never fully recovered from what happened inside that house. And a case that has remained open for more than 110 years. Josiah Moore, Sarah Moore, Herman, Mary, Arthur, Paul, Lena and Ina Stillinger. They deserve justice. They never got it. Subscribe to Unburied Vault. Because nothing stays buried forever.